About 5 years ago, I made what I called an A to Z of squash, and I talked about 26 different things and how they relate to your squash. Somebody made a comment and said that I should update it, and you know what? They were right. So here is the 2019 version of my A to Z of squash. A is for aggression. You should be one of these players who really want to win, because the chances are if you're one of these players who's just going to have a little bit of fun, well, you're not going to win very much. And that's okay. Please don't misunderstand me. If you are a recreational squash player and you just want to play and have some fun and win sometimes, fantastic. I'm very happy for you. But if you want to win, you've got to be one of those people who really want to win and try hard to win. Go on court and don't just hit the ball with some intention and some aggression. And that doesn't mean hitting it hard. It means looking to create opportunities and then taking those opportunities once you've done that. Aggression. B is for balance. One of my goals this year was to improve my balance by using the Swiss ball and doing balancing exercises. We often think about strength and cardio work, but we forget that when we get to the ball, if we're not particularly well balanced, we're never going to be able to transfer our weight into the ball. So we have to be balanced, and there's plenty of different exercises you can do. You can even just stand on one leg and throw a medicine ball against the wall and improve your balance that way. C is for create. I mentioned this in the aggression. Hitting the ball to the back is done simply because we are looking to create opportunities. But there are other ways to create opportunities. Hitting the ball low against very tall players. Hitting the ball high against maybe tall players or shorter players. But don't just hit the ball. Hit it with the idea of creating opportunities and then taking those opportunities. And there are so many different ways of doing it. So you need to go out and learn and watch some of the players on YouTube and learn to create opportunities. D for defense. Now, if you're playing an opponent and they are creating opportunities by moving you around, stretching you, you need to know how to negate that. And one of the ways, or the best way, is to play defense. And that could be hitting the ball high and soft, or it could be just hitting the ball tighter. But you can't just be one type of player. You have to be different types of player, and you have to be defensive, especially at the front. If you are being pushed to the front and you are struggling, don't smack the ball hoping to hit a winner. Hit the ball high, give yourself time. Defense. E is for experiment. Some of the best players I've ever played against have not been the fittest players or the ones who've got the best technique. They're the ones who understand what they need to do at that time against me or against other players. And you need to experiment with that. You need to find out what works against certain types of opponents, or even what works against one particular opponent. I remember very clearly that Jonah used to say, when you come off the court after the first game, win or lose, you should know more about that opponent than they know about you. And to do that, you have to try moving them around and seeing how they respond to different things. Experiment. F is for fake. Seems to be quite popular at the moment, and I can't say that I'm a huge fan of it, but it is fun to try to develop. That when you're at the front of the court, you maybe hold your position a little bit longer than you would do. You maybe move your head to one side a little bit more than you might normally, just to make it harder for your opponent to know where you're going. Personally, I think it's more important that you hit great shots that are obvious than hitting weak shots that are harder to read. But of course, if you can do both, if you can hit great shots that are hard to read, then that's even better. So it's something that the pros do, and I understand club players want to do it. So if you want to, when you get into the front of the court, instead of hitting the ball as you normally do, try to prepare a little bit earlier and wait a fraction longer to let your opponent commit to a side, and then you can try hitting it. F is for fake. G is for grip. because the grip is fundamental. It's a limitation on your abilities. Even if you're the fittest, the smartest player, if you're not holding the racket correctly, you're not allowing yourself to hit the ball correctly and therefore take control of the match. So if you don't have a good grip and you know it, go out and find one of my videos or somebody else's videos, but learn how to hold the racket properly so that you can begin to hit the ball. Yes, it won't be easy. Changing your grip, especially if you've been playing a long time, can be difficult, but it will be worth it in the end, I promise. H is for heat up. I've talked about this before. Warm up is not a good word because I don't want you to think that you just need to be warm. You should be hot. So make sure you're sweating before you go on court and before you even start hitting the first ball. You should be prepared to play your maximum level from the very first point. Don't be one of these people who say, I'll warm up in the first game. No, heat up before the first point. I is for ignore. Now I'm going to suggest that you ignore the score. There's a whole interesting philosophy about whether your shot selection should change based on the score, and honestly I don't think it should. I think if you are 7-0 down, you shouldn't be going for smacking nicks. You should be trying to get back in the match, and if you're 7-0 up, you shouldn't be relaxing and thinking that you've won the game. The best I have ever played is when I didn't know the score. I totally blocked it out for these few matches, and I managed to focus on playing squash, not worrying about the score. And I'm sure we've all got to the point where we're close to winning a match and we're actually imagining or thinking about, oh yeah, I've won this match, I'm going to be in the bar soon and relaxing. No, ignore the score, play the point that moment. J is for jump. Now, in the previous A to Z, we talked about jump rope, but in this case, what we're actually talking about is plyometrics. Jumping is plyometrics. Plyometrics is when you bounce and you move on. That's why people do the T-step or the split step in the T area. Just before their opponent hits the ball, they do a little jump so that they're ready to bounce. And that's what you should be doing. If you're not jumping rope, that's fine, but you can get some of those like step boxes, and there's plenty of different exercises that you can do. You can even do them without, but they're better if you have to lift your legs up. I'm not talking about jumping high on those really big boxes. I'm just talking about doing some plyometrics to increase the speed that you can start moving. Because you need to get to the ball quickly. And there are a lot of players who are fast, but they take a little while to get started. And then it's like a big problem for them. K is know the rules. Know what you're allowed to do, know what you're not allowed to do, but specifically to do with lets and strokes, because you only need to go to the Reddit, the squash subreddit, and see often there's lots and lots of questions. Now, I don't consider myself to be an expert on the rules. I know what I think is right and I know the rules, but there are probably many people out there who know the rules better than I do. But you should know at least the basics. Know exactly what is a stroke, why it's a stroke, what's a let, why is it a let, what's a no let, and why is it a no let. You don't want to get into a match and find that somebody's bullying you into saying, oh, that's a let, and you'd be like, yeah, okay, I don't really know. No, don't let that happen. Know the rules. L is for lob. And I'm not just talking about the D for defense when you're at the front and you have to keep the ball going. You can have like a service return lob. Now, lob normally means from the front and very high. But there are plenty of times when you should be hitting wider cross courts or higher straight drives down the wall. Lob is more about the idea of realizing how much front wall there is, because there's a huge front wall. And with this interactive wall, it'd be quite interesting to see how many club players, when they play, like the heat map on the front wall, and it would be very limited. Okay, maybe the professionals would be almost as limited, but I bet that they hit the ball in higher positions when they have to. Of course, from the front, when you hit a lob, you're not hitting on the very top because it would go out, but they're aiming for the top. Think about the lob as area at the back to give yourself time, but also to be an effective attacking, an offensive shot as well. Lob more. M is for move. duh, you say, of course I've got to move, but it's how you move. You should be moving lots of little adjustment steps around the tee area, and then the final step should be the lunge, the crouch when you're very low. You transfer your body weight into the ball, but you don't go too far unless you have to. If you can control it, then you can come back faster. So you've got to make sure that you're doing lots of little dancing adjustment steps in the middle, and then a final lunge at the end. You need to move well. The best players move really well. Not always the fastest, but they move well. They almost glide around the court. Maybe that's what I should have made G, glide. N is for no nonsense. I like to think of myself as a coach who focuses on the basics. So as I said in F for fake, I'm not a huge fan of that. I think that there are more important things that you could be doing. But most of the time, that's all we need to do as squash players. We need to do the basics really well. And you can overanalyze sometimes. You can think too much about all of these different things. Most of the time, you need to hit the ball quite tight to the wall or wide enough so that your opponent can't volley it. It needs to be a good length so that it causes them problems, and you need to keep doing that until you are in a position to create or instigate situations, and then you can be attacking. I am not suggesting that we only hit the ball to the back, but squash is quite a simple game when it comes to it, and a very tight shot down the wall, a very wide shot, is likely to create opportunities for you. So no fancy nonsense about cross-court nicks. Yes, it's fun, but that one cross-court nick is not really what wins matches. It's that tight length. It's the rushing of the opponent. It's putting them in difficult situations. That's what wins matches, and that's why N is no nonsense. O is for opponent. You need to change your game based on who you're playing. If you play the same game all of the time, you will win some and you will lose some. If you change your game based on who you're playing, you're more likely to win. And also, when an opponent starts playing differently against you than they normally do, you might be able to understand and how to counteract it. Now, you don't necessarily have to make big changes, and we're certainly not talking about changing your swing or anything like that. What we're talking about is the type of shot that works against them. Jonah Barrington always used to say, when you come off court after the first game, you should know more about them than they know about you. And that's a great thing to say, and it's really true, but it can be difficult. And to do that, you've got to try different things against them. It doesn't mean the first game has to be a little bit of everything, but you just need to become aware or conscious of what your opponent is doing to you and what seems to work and what doesn't seem to work against them. So learn about your opponent. P is for pre-habilitation. Now it's kind of like a newly invented word, because there is rehabilitation, which is something that you do after you've been injured or you've had a period where you haven't been working so well. But pre-habilitation is the idea of doing exercises and routines that help you avoid being injured. Now you can sometimes never avoid being injured. Maybe you're just really unlucky in one particular match, but you can decrease the chance of those things, especially when you get older like me. You can do exercises at home, and there's plenty of videos on YouTube. What's important here is doing something that reduces the risk of injury or reduces the risk of aches and pains the day after you've played a particularly hard match. You know, preempt these problems before they happen. Q is for the best movers are the quietest movers. Now, I'm not talking about the screeches that, you know, the top of the end of your toe makes when it sort of moves across lots of squash courts. I'm talking about the general thudding that when people hit the ground. Now, I've seen some very big squash players that move beautifully and they are very quiet. And I've seen some very small or thin people who have really been quite loud, and that generally means that they're using their heels on the ground before they get to the last step. That's not the only reason, but what you want to do is you want to be able to move around quietly, because the quiet movers are the ones that glide, and I've already mentioned that word already. They almost dance around the court. They don't seem as though they're putting much effort because they've practiced their movement. You want to be a quiet mover, not a thumper. R is for reach. The last step you use to get to the ball should be a longer step than normal. You want to maximize your body weight, and to do that, you need to reach. If you are too close to the ball, your body weight could either be moving backwards or down, and that means that you're not using it effectively. In addition, if you're that close to the ball, you've probably taken one extra step to get there, which means another extra step to get back. 2 steps every shot is a lot of extra work. So feel that you've got to reach out for the last one. And I don't mean it's an extended reach where you lose balance. I just mean that you're leaning forward and you're using the full length of your arm and your body if that's what the shot requires. Of course, if you're in the back corner, it's unlikely or less likely that you're going to have to reach, especially if the ball comes back off the back wall. But if you're at the front or it's low down, reach. It's quite hard work. You'll need to improve your strength in your back muscles, and some pre-habilitation, which we've already mentioned, could help with that. But learn to use the length of your body. Reach. S is for solo practice. If you've watched any of my videos, you know that I'm in love with that, partly because I can't play anymore and I have to do that, but also partly because I just love the sensation of hitting the ball. But S is for solo practice. Don't do it because your opponent's late. Don't do it because you can't think of anything else to do. Do it because it's one of the best ways to improve your skill and ability. And you hit twice as many shots almost when you're on court on your own. If you've got a lot of excuses and say, oh, but the courts are too expensive, I understand that because it's true. Well, in that case then, say to one of your playing partners, do you want to do some solo practice together? Which sounds like an oxymoron, but what you do is you use half of the court each, whether that's half of the side for doing shots up and down the wall, or whether it's half of the front back for doing short shots or side to sides. There's plenty of variations. In fact, maybe I'll make a video about that. But make sure that you don't have any excuse for doing solo practice, and recognize that it's a really good thing to do. S for solo practice. T is for targets. Now, I'm not talking about metaphorical targets about, oh, you know, I really want to win this tournament in 6 months, or I want this. I'm talking about physical targets that when you're either practicing or when you're playing matches. Now, when you're playing matches, you don't have actual physical targets, but you can still imagine that they're there. But when you are practicing, whether that's solo practice, S is for solo practice, or whether it's with a drill partner or you're playing conditioned games, use some targets. Now, I'm going to be making a whole video about targets, but there are 2 types of targets here. Targets that stop the rally straight away, for example, a racket or a shoe, or targets that allow you to continue, pieces of paper or even little bits of ribbon or rulers. You need to decide what's best for you. Most of the time, I feel that you should continue the rally once you've hit the target, and you should just get an extra point. What worries me about shoes and rackets, unless they're used in the right way, is that as soon as you hit it, you stop and you think that's the end of the rally. But in reality, if the ball was to be in the same place that the target was, the rally would probably carry on. That's why I like targets that allow you to carry on, but still recognize when you've got the ball in the right place. So think about using those, and if you can't, you have to wait until my video comes. Sorry. U is for ugly. And what I'm talking about here is that playing beautiful squash is fantastic, but sometimes you have to play the kind of squash that doesn't look very nice and is really all that you need to do to win. In fact, there was a book some time ago, I think it was called Win Ugly. I haven't read it, but I know it exists. And what it's about is this idea that you have to do what you have to do to win. It might not be pretty sometimes, and I'm not talking about cheating, or I'm not talking about doing things that are not nice. I'm just talking about playing the kind of squash that might not be beautiful to look at, but is the kind of squash that wins on the day, on that court, against that opponent. Of course, you only really need to do that if it's like a tournament match. The rest of the time you should be playing, hopefully, beautiful squash. But sometimes winning squash doesn't always look very nice. Sorry. V is for velocity. Now, we're not just talking about how hard you hit the ball, we're talking about how fast you move. I am at the age where I can hit the ball more more or less the same speed I could when I was 20, but I definitely can't move the same speed as when I was 20. So I need to make sure that I'm not hitting the ball too hard and I don't give myself enough time to come out of the back wall or get away from the front corners, for example. So I want you to look at the comparison between how hard you can hit the ball and how hard you move. And if you can't move quick enough, then you're probably hitting it too hard. And I'd also add to vary the speed that you hit the ball. I've said this a number of times. Don't hit the ball at one speed. You can vary it to different degrees, but think about not hitting it at the same time because that breaks the opponent's rhythm. But the main idea here for the V is the velocity of the velocity of how you hit the ball and the velocity of your movement. Make sure that they match. I don't mean they are the same. I just mean that make sure that you can move out of the way of the shot that you hit. Oof, we got there, but we got there. W is for why. Now I've talked about this in a completely separate video, which is called the why game, but essentially what I mean is that when you're playing when you're playing a match, when you get to a situation and something happens, you've got to ask why. So at the end of the game, it could be, why did I not win that point? Why did my opponent win it? Why did I hit that shot? And you can do it as you're playing, of course mentally, or you can get a coach to stand on a balcony or somebody and then he'll say, stop, or she will say, stop. And you have to explain why you hit the ball at that point in that place. And if you can't, then it probably means that you don't really know what you should be doing, or you're just doing it on almost like automatic pilot. You should know why you've done something at any one time. It might be the wrong reason, but if you say, I played that shot because I was in a good position and I wanted to hit the ball short because I felt he was behind me or she was behind me, fine. If they were not behind you, okay, that's another problem. But you should know why you're doing things. And that's the same for any practice that you do, anything that a coach tells you or a YouTube video tells you, make sure you understand, why am I doing this? If somebody tells you to hit the ball here, ask yourself why. And if there's not a good reason, well, look harder or don't do it. X is Xeric. Yeah, I know. I really had to look in the dictionary. But Xeric means adapted to a dry environment. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about making sure that you are hydrated. Hydration is always in the news about the 6 glasses, and I make that funny face because there's actually no scientific research that says 6. But what you really should be doing is making sure that when you go to the bathroom, it's quite clear. Forgive me if that's a little embarrassing for you. But water is incredibly useful for making sure that it cleans your muscles and allows all of the body parts to do everything. But don't play matches and don't drink enough. Make sure you've drunk before and make sure you drink a little bit, depending on your bathroom schedule, during the match. But don't become one of these people who just say, I don't need to drink, or I only have a fizzy drink. Drink water, drink enough for you to feel hydrated, and your performance will improve. I know it's a stretch, this Xeric, but really, it will make a difference. Don't be a desert. Just like in the last video, the X's and the Y's are a little bit strange. Now, in this one, we have the word yar, and that means agility and liveliness. Now, what that really means is that when you're on the tee, you can't be too relaxed. You can't go into a squash game hoping that the balls are going to come to you. You kind of got to hunt them down. You've got to be looking for them. You've got to be agile. You've got to be lively. You've got to be looking for those situations. And notice how I'm kind of moving my arms and my head here. I'm not just standing on the tee. I am thinking about moving quickly, moving to the ball, reaching, stretching. I've got to have this mentality of I really want to get to the ball. I don't want it just to come to me. I want to get there. Agility and liveliness. Yar! And you can be a pirate as well if you want. Yar! Z is for zones. You should really be thinking about different types of areas and what you should be doing. Of course, the simple idea would be shots into the back corner are probably defensive, shots in the middle of the court could be a little bit more aggressive or instigate or create situations, and then shots at the front either be very aggressive or quite defensive. There really is not much difference at the front of the court. But what you need to do is you need to realise that just like a football team who's got different players who do different things, you are a player who has to do different things in different places. And you just need to make sure that when the ball is close to the wall, you probably play defensive, because that zone is a defensive one. When it's in the middle of the court and it's bouncing nicely, even if the opponent's on the tee, that zone could be one for killing the ball. I'll definitely make a video about shot selection, but just get your idea of thinking about zones and where you should be. And I often talk about the traffic light system. The red would be a very defensive shot, the yellow or amber would be, I can create something here without putting myself under too much pressure, and the green should be, okay, now you really need to attack and go for it. Doesn't mean smacking the nick and hitting the tin, it just means being aggressive, which of course is A. If you think the content of my videos is useful, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on notifications. This is a playlist of the technical aspects of squash, which probably interests you if you've watched this video. This is a video that YouTube thinks is a really good fit for you. Thanks for watching, and remember, do something every single day to improve your squash. See ya!